The morning sun spilled across the white curtains of the church's bridal suite, its golden rays bouncing off every polished surface like they were in on the celebration. I stood in the corner of the room, an outsider in a world dressed in satin and lace. My sister Marissa floated around in her wedding gown, radiant and flawless, like a porcelain doll brought to life. She had always loved an audience, and today she had the biggest one of her life. Everyone fawned over her. The bridesmaids in matching blush pink dresses, our mother fussing with the veil, even the photographer snapping away as if Marissa were royalty. Laughter bubbled through the air, light and airy, but every sound grated against my ears. I forced my lips into what might have passed for a smile, though my jaw ached from the effort. To anyone else, it was a beautiful morning. To me, it was the calm before the storm. Because I knew the truth. Because my son had whispered it to me. She hit me, he had said. Those 3 words replayed in my head, looping endlessly, poisoning every ribbon, every flower, every laugh. My little boy, just 8 years old, with eyes too old for his face, had looked up at me that night, trembling. He hadn't cried when he said it. He'd spoken flat, like someone giving up. That hurt more than the words themselves. And now, as Marissa preened in front of her mirror, I saw not a blushing bride, but the monster who had hurt my child. The monster no one else believed existed. I shifted my weight, my heels pressing into the plush carpet, watching her smile and twirl. Our mother clasped her hands together, misty-eyed. "Oh, Marissa, you look like an angel." Marissa giggled, a sweet tinkling sound, then cast a glance in my direction. For the briefest second, her smile sharpened into something smug, knowing. My chest tightened. She knew I was here. She knew I was watching. And she knew I couldn't say anything without looking like the bitter, jealous sister. That had always been her weapon. Appearances. And today she wanted perfection. Well, perfection was about to bleed. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. Less than 3 hours until the ceremony. The church bells outside chimed the quarter hour, and with each peal, my plan ticked closer to life. My heart raced, not from nerves, but from anticipation. The kind that builds when you've carried pain for too long, when it festers into something sharp, something dangerous. I had carried my son's pain, my own pain, every bruise on his spirit that no one else cared to see. They thought today was about love and family. For me, today was about justice. I would not let Marissa walk out of this church with her reputation untarnished, not after what she did. That was when my son tugged at my dress. "Mom," he whispered, eyes wide as he glanced around the crowded room. He looked small, lost among the swirling fabric and towering adults. "Do we have to stay here?" I knelt down, brushing a curl from his forehead. His little hands were clammy. I wanted to scoop him up, shield him, run far away from this poisoned place. But not yet. "Just a little longer, baby," I said softly, my voice calm though my insides roared. "Then we'll go. I promise." He bit his lip, nodding, but I could see the distrust in his eyes. He hated being here as much as I did. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what would make my revenge burn brighter. The organist began rehearsing in the chapel next door, the heavy notes leaking through the walls. Marissa squealed and twirled again, veil fluttering around her like angel wings. I straightened, my gaze never leaving her. This was her day, but it would end as my victory. Because when my son told me, "She hit me," I made a promise. The night my son told me what Marissa had done was a night that carved itself into me like stone. It was late, well past his bedtime, when I heard the shuffle of his small feet against the carpet. I'd been sitting on the couch, the television flickering low, though I wasn't watching it. The house was quiet, unnaturally so, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. "Mom?" His voice was thin, carrying that tremor children use when they're testing whether the world is safe enough to listen. I turned, frowning. "Ethan? What's wrong, sweetheart?" He stood in the doorway, pajamas wrinkled, his stuffed bear dangling from one hand. His eyes, God, those eyes, looked hollow, too heavy for a child. He didn't come closer right away. He just stood there, a silhouette against the dim hall light, like he wasn't sure if he should step into the room at all. I reached out my hand. Come here. He obeyed, dragging his feet across the floor until he crawled onto the couch beside me. He tucked himself close, as if my body could shield him from whatever weighed on him. For a long time, he didn't speak. His little fingers twisted the bear's ear, round and round, over and over. Finally, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, he said it. She hit me. The words dropped into the silence like stones into water, rippling through everything I thought I knew. I froze. What? He kept his eyes on the bear, refusing to meet mine. Auntie Marissa. She hit me. My chest constricted so tight, I thought I might stop breathing. Ethan, when? When did she? At Grandma's house, he cut in, still whispering. When you weren't there. My hand trembled against his back. Why? Why would she do that? He shrugged, eyes glistening. I don't know. I was playing with her phone. She told me to give it back. I didn't right away. His voice broke, a crack of shame spilling out. So she slapped me. Hard. Every instinct in me flared alive. The protective fury of a mother, the disbelief of a sister, the fire of betrayal. It all collided in one violent burst inside my chest. I cupped his cheek gently, tilting his face toward mine. There, under the soft glow of the lamp, I saw it. A faint shadow, just fading, along his jawline. A bruise. It was real. It wasn't just words. I pulled him against me, holding him so tight he squeaked. Baby, you should have told me right away. I was scared. Scared of her? He nodded, so small, so fragile. And of you. I thought you'd be mad at me. My throat burned. How could he think that? What had this family done to make my little boy believe he'd be punished for telling the truth? I rocked him gently, even though he was too old for rocking. Never, Ethan, never. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? He nodded again, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. That night, after he finally drifted off in my arms, I sat awake staring into the dark. My thoughts twisted like storm clouds, lightning striking faster than I could keep up. Marissa, my sister, my own flesh and blood. I wanted to believe Ethan had misunderstood. Maybe she'd been playing too rough. Maybe he'd tripped. Maybe, God, I wanted an excuse that didn't make her a monster. But the bruise, that fading line along his face, that was no accident. I pressed a hand to my mouth, shaking. Memories of our childhood rose unbidden. Marissa's sharp tongue, the way she always had to win, her little cruelties dressed as jokes. She had always been spoiled, always the favorite. But violence? Yes, a voice in me whispered. You know what she's capable of. You've always known. And now, she had hurt my son. Something snapped to me that night. A promise formed, sharp and unyielding. I would protect him, no matter what it cost me. Even if it meant tearing my sister's perfect little world to shreds. The next morning, I confronted my mother. She hit him, I said flatly, standing in her kitchen while she buttered toast like it was any ordinary day. Marissa hit Ethan, he told me. My mother didn't even pause. She just sighed, as though I told her the weather forecast was disappointing. Oh, for heaven's sake, not this again. My jaw dropped. What do you mean again? You've always been jealous of Marissa, she said, her tone clipped, dismissive. Always looking for ways to drag her down. You twist things, exaggerate. Are you kidding me? My voice rose, cracking under the strain. He has a bruise on his face. Her eyes finally flicked to mine, cold and unwavering. Children bruise. They fall. They make up stories when they're upset. Don't you dare accuse your sister of something like this without proof. Proof. As if my son's trembling confession, his fear, his bruise weren't proof enough. I left her house shaking, rage boiling so hot I could barely grip the steering wheel. Proof. Fine. If they wanted proof, I would give them proof. And someday, I would give Marissa the reckoning she deserved. Perfect. Let's move on to Chapter 3. This chapter will expand the story with childhood memories, sibling rivalry, and the roots of the conflict, giving readers context for why the protagonist feels this deep, simmering anger toward Marissa. Even now, years later, the memories of my childhood with Marissa clawed at me like restless ghosts. I remembered the way she would smile at our parents, a picture of innocence, while I struggled under their scrutiny. Every mistake I made was magnified. Every success of hers was celebrated with fanfare. She learned quickly how to weaponize charm, how to twist the truth until it suited her. And I learned to stay quiet, to swallow my anger, to bite back the words that could never be spoken. But now, I could see it all more clearly. Every bruise Ethan bore, every tear he tried to hide, was an echo of those years I had spent in her shadow. It had started with little things. A broken toy I was blamed for. A scraped knee she claimed I had caused. A secret whisper to our parents that painted me as the troublemaker. And always, always, the way she could make herself look innocent while I looked guilty. I remembered one particular birthday. I was 9, excited for a cake that I had begged my mother to make. But Marissa had decided she didn't like the frosting flavor, and while I wasn't looking, she had smashed it with a hand too small to contain so much cruelty. I had cried in the corner, but the memory of her sweetly asking, "What's wrong, sis?" as her parents scolded me instead, still burned inside me. That was the beginning. That was when I learned that appearances could kill. As I sat in Ethan's room that night, replaying what he had said, I saw the pattern again. Marissa had never changed. She had always craved control, always needed to be the center of attention. And now, she had crossed a line that could never be ignored. I ran my fingers along the edge of his little blanket, thinking about how long I had protected him, how many nights I had held him as he cried over nightmares, scraped knees, or bruised hearts. And suddenly, a fierce clarity struck me. I would not allow history to repeat itself. It wasn't just about Ethan. It was about me, too. I had spent decades forgiving her, explaining away her cruelty, convincing myself it didn't matter, that family had to stick together no matter what. But seeing her hit my son, that shattered every fragile compromise I had made with myself. I realized that if I let this go, it would be a signal to my family, to the world, to Marissa herself, that she could continue to hurt others and remain untouchable. No, not this time. Flashbacks began to tumble through my mind like an avalanche. The Christmas when she stole the money I had been saving for months, enough for a small vacation for just the two of us, and flaunted it in front of the entire family. I had tried to confront her, tried to argue, but she had smiled, that sickeningly sweet smile, and said, "Oh, come on, don't be a crybaby. It's Christmas." And I had cried, alone. There had been other moments too many to count. Moments of public humiliation, of whispers behind closed doors, of parents siding with her without hesitation. The pattern was clear. My pain didn't matter. Her whims were law. And now, the pattern threatened to extend to Ethan. I remembered watching him that morning, the way he clung to my leg like I was the only safe thing in the world. My heart ached for him, but beneath that ache was something else. A cold, burning determination. It was time. Time to stop pretending that family ties were stronger than justice. Time to make her feel, even briefly, the fear and humiliation she had inflicted on me. And now my son. I opened my journal, the one I kept hidden, full of scribbled observations, reminders of past slights, details that no one would ever notice but me. I started writing down everything I could remember from Ethan's story, every bruise, every tear. I wrote Marissa's name over and over, not in anger, but with precision, as if engraving it into stone. This was the start of my plan. The memory of that night lingered like a shadow over every moment leading up to Marissa's wedding. Each morning, I would see Ethan's little face, so full of worry, so unsure, and it reminded me of the stakes. This wasn't about petty sibling rivalry anymore. This was about protection, about justice, about balance. And balance, I decided, was something I would restore myself. Family dinners had always been a battlefield disguised as tradition. Even now, as I sat at the long, polished table with plates of food untouched in front of me, I could feel the old patterns pressing in. Marissa sat across from me, radiant and oblivious, chatting animatedly with relatives who hung on her every word. Their eyes sparkled with admiration or fear. I could never tell which. I watched Ethan at my side, poking at his mashed potatoes with a fork, staring at the floor. His little hands trembled slightly, a subtle but unmistakable echo of the bruises on his face. He didn't speak. He barely ate. And I knew exactly why. I knew because I had lived it. When I first tried to tell my parents about what Marissa had done to Ethan, I had expected outrage. I had expected them to take me seriously. Instead, I had been met with exasperation. "Oh, for heaven's sake," my father had said. His voice was calm, too calm, as if speaking to a child having a bad dream. "You're reading too much into this. Children fight sometimes. It's normal." My mother had nodded in agreement, her hands folded neatly on the table, lips pressed thin. "Marissa would never hurt Ethan," she said firmly. "You're imagining things." I had wanted to scream. Because I wasn't imagining. I had seen the bruise. I had heard Ethan's words. I had felt his fear radiating off him like heat from an open flame. But they didn't see that. They saw only what they wanted to see. The perfect child, the perfect sister, the perfect family. And it wasn't just my parents. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even family friends had weighed in. All of them, in subtle ways, reinforced the narrative that Marissa was untouchable. "You always overreact," one cousin had whispered to me at Christmas. "She's just a child herself," an aunt had said, patting my arm with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Even the people who had once been my allies seemed to vanish the moment Marissa entered a room. It was as if she carried a shield, invisible to everyone else but me. I realized then that family could be more dangerous than an enemy, because they could dismiss truth, erase evidence, and leave you alone to pick up the pieces. The day before the wedding, I watched Marissa fuss over final preparations. She was radiant and cruel in her perfection. Everything had to be right. The flowers, the dress, the seating arrangement. Everyone must see how flawless she was. I clenched my fists in my lap. I thought of Ethan, of the fear he carried in his small frame, of the long nights I had spent soothing his nightmares, of the times I had kissed his bruises and whispered, "I'm here. I've got you." And I thought of Marissa, laughing and twirling as if she had done nothing wrong. It made my blood boil. I knew I needed allies, but there were none. No one would stand with me. Not even my parents. Not even those who claimed to love justice. It became clear that if I wanted to protect Ethan, if I wanted to ensure Marissa never hurt anyone again, I would have to do it myself. I began to make notes. Small, careful observations of her behavior, little things others would dismiss as harmless. The way she snapped at Ethan when no one was looking. The way she smiled, just slightly too sweetly, when she caught me watching. Every incident, every microaggression, every bruised ego. I recorded them all. Not for vindication, not for argument, but to build a map of her cruelty. A blueprint. It was meticulous work, but I didn't mind. The fire inside me demanded it. The fire that had been smoldering since childhood, fanned now by Ethan's pain. That night, I tucked him into bed. He pressed his small hand into mine. "Mom," he whispered, "is she going to do it again?" "No," I said, though my heart hammered in my chest. "She won't. I promise." He didn't ask why or how. He didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. He already knew I would do whatever it took. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't just protecting him anymore. I was preparing for war. The wedding was approaching. Every invitation sent, every flower ordered, every dress fitted was another reminder that Marissa would soon step into a world of her own making, and I would be there, watching, waiting. She might have believed herself untouchable. She might have believed that the family's denial shielded her from consequence. But she was wrong. I had Ethan, I had truth, and soon I would have my chance. By the time the weekend arrived, the wedding was no longer a distant event. It was looming, palpable, impossible to ignore. Invitations framed in delicate calligraphy hung on doors. Bridesmaids texted endlessly about fittings, and social media buzzed with engagement photos, hashtags, and heartfelt posts. Marissa had built her perfect world, a world of appearances and smiles, and it glowed like a fragile bubble waiting to be pierced. I watched it all from the sidelines, Ethan's hand clutching mine, and I realized something undeniable. I could no longer wait. It wasn't enough to protect my son. Not anymore. The fire in me had grown too hot, too insistent for patience or hesitation. I had spent years watching Marissa manipulate everyone around her, excuse her cruelty, and escape unscathed. I had spent years swallowing my rage, telling myself that family loyalty mattered more than justice. But that was over. No one would help us. No one would intervene. Not my parents, not our relatives, and certainly not Marissa herself. If I wanted justice, I had to take it. That night, I sat at my desk, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I opened the journal I had started weeks ago, the one filled with observations, bruises, and whispered confessions. Page after page documented Marissa's cruelty, small incidents that no one else had noticed, each one meticulously recorded. It was a map, a blueprint. And now it was time to turn that blueprint into action. I picked up a pen and wrote 4 words in bold, deliberate letters. I will not forgive. The words trembled slightly on the paper, but the resolve behind them was absolute. I thought of Ethan sleeping peacefully in the next room. He trusted me, depended on me, needed me to be strong. And I would be. I would protect him, yes. But more than that, I would ensure Marissa faced the consequences of her actions. I owed it to my son and to myself to act decisively. My plan wouldn't be reckless. I wouldn't allow emotion to override precision. Everything had to be calculated, measured. I needed timing, opportunity, leverage, and most importantly, I needed patience. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, imagining the wedding day. Every detail unfolded in my mind. The laughter, the flowers, the music, the perfect smile on Marissa's face, and beneath it all, the chaos I intended to sow. The first step was observation. I couldn't act blindly. I had to understand her schedule, her routines, the people she trusted, the weaknesses in her armor. I began crafting a mental timeline. Morning preparations. She would be preoccupied with hair, makeup, and dressing. Guests' arrival, a window of distraction, perfect for subtle interference. Ceremony. Moments of tension where a single revelation could unravel the facade. Reception. Maximum exposure, maximum audience, maximum effect. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could ruin my chance. I also knew I needed allies, or at least witnesses. Not family, of course. They were blind or biased. But there were others. Neighbors, friends who had glimpsed Marissa's manipulative tendencies, and even vendors who might notice unusual behavior. I would gather them carefully, subtly, so that when the time came, I could strike with undeniable impact. The thought of it sent a shiver of satisfaction down my spine. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice. Every insult, every bruise, every slight she had inflicted on my life and Ethan's would be reflected back in ways she couldn't anticipate. For the next few days, I moved carefully, like a chess player setting pieces in place before the decisive move. I observed Marissa's morning routines, taking mental notes on when she was most distracted. I recorded conversations, small gestures, and inconsistencies in her stories. Every smile, every casual insult, every attempt to dominate the room added fuel to my plan. Ethan, of course, stayed close to me. His presence was a constant reminder of why I was doing this, why patience and cunning mattered. He didn't ask questions, but I could feel his trust and fear intermingling with mine. It was a heavy burden, and one I would carry without faltering. On the evening before the wedding, I made the final decision. There would be no turning back. I would act carefully, strategically, and with precision. The stakes were clear. Marissa's reputation, my son's safety, and the fragile truth we had been forced to guard. One misstep could ruin everything, but hesitation was far worse. I whispered to myself as I prepared for bed, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This ends tomorrow. And with that, I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of white dresses stained with secrets, laughter interrupted by revelations, and the moment when justice, long delayed, would finally arrive. The morning of the wedding arrived with a quiet tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. Outside, birds chirped, the sun poured through the windows, and life went on as if nothing was about to shatter. But inside, I moved with a different rhythm, one dictated by purpose, precision, and barely contained fury. Ethan followed closely behind me, silent but watchful. He had slept fitfully, dream shadowed by memories of Marissa's cruelty. I could feel his unease, and it sharpened my focus. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day that justice, long denied, would begin its careful course. I had prepared carefully. Every step I took, every decision I made, had been planned to avoid suspicion. The first move was subtle, almost imperceptible, a small crack in the perfect facade Marissa had spent years building. I began in her bridal suite. While she fussed with her veil, checking every angle in the mirror, I quietly shifted small items in the room. A misplaced hairpin, a slightly wrinkled ribbon, a glass of water subtly moved to the edge of the table. Each small action seemed trivial, but together they created an undercurrent of disruption, tiny annoyances that would gnaw at her focus without raising alarm. Ethan stayed close to me, watching her with wide eyes. I knelt to whisper in his ear, "Stay calm, baby. Watch quietly, but don't get involved. Mommy's got this." He nodded solemnly, his small hands gripping mine. I could feel the tension radiating off him, the same mix of fear and trust he had carried since the night he confided in me. It was a burden to hold, but also a source of strength. Every step I took today, I took for him. As the bridesmaids buzzed around Marissa, adjusting dresses and straightening hair, I moved with practiced subtlety. A folded program left just slightly off the table. A glass of orange juice nudged to the floor with a gentle touch. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to make her second-guess herself. And she noticed. Her smile faltered for the briefest of moments. Her eyes darted toward me, suspicion flickering, but she dismissed it quickly, assuming it was just nerves. That was the beauty of subtlety. She wouldn't know until it was too late. I slipped out of the room and made my way to the guest seating charts. The plan was to cause small, controlled chaos among the attendees, mixing names, adjusting seating slightly, ensuring that when the ceremony began, small tensions would ripple outward. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to undermine her flawless vision of perfection. I moved with precision, double-checking each name, making tiny edits that would only become apparent at the exact right moment. Every alteration was deliberate. Every disruption was calculated to sow doubt, anxiety, and unease. Back in the suite, I overheard a conversation between Marissa and her maid of honor. "I just want everything perfect," she said, her voice tight, anxious. "It's the most important day of my life." Perfect. That word echoed in my mind. Perfect had always been her armor, her shield, her weapon. Today that armor would crack. Later, during the final dress fittings, I introduced another subtle interference. A tiny tear in the lining of her gown, nearly invisible to anyone else, but noticeable enough to unsettle her. She ran her fingers along the seam, her brow furrowing, and I bit back a smile. It was working. Every interaction, every subtle disruption, fed my growing sense of control. Marissa's facade began to show tiny cracks, a sigh too sharp, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a hurried adjustment to hair or makeup. These small victories, almost imperceptible to anyone else, fueled my determination. Ethan watched from the corner, his eyes wide. I could see the questions in them, unspoken but understood. I leaned down and whispered, "Mommy's making sure she knows she can't hurt anyone else." His small nod was enough. By midday, the stage was set. Small disruptions had accumulated, misplaced items, subtle changes, minor miscommunications. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back to me. Yet every action contributed to a growing sense of unease among Marissa and the bridal party. I stepped back for a moment, surveying the scene. Everything was in place. The chaos had begun, slow and steady, almost invisible, yet unstoppable once set in motion. And I knew that this was only the beginning. By the morning of the rehearsal, the wedding had already become a delicate tension between perfection and chaos. Marissa was radiantly anxious, her eyes darting from task to task, while everyone else tried to keep up with her impossible standards. It was intoxicating to watch, and I stayed in the shadows, quiet and unseen, observing her unraveling under the weight of her own expectations. Ethan followed me like a shadow. He had grown quieter since the last few days, watching, learning, understanding that today was bigger than any one moment. I held his small hand gently, reminding myself that every move I made had to protect him first, then dismantle Marissa second. I had mapped out her day with surgical precision. Each interaction, each distraction, each misplaced item was designed to create micro moments of tension, tiny disturbances that would accumulate into something undeniable. The first ripple I created was subtle. A misplaced escort card at the rehearsal dinner. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just a single card switched between tables. Guests would be slightly confused, shifting seats, murmuring to each other. Marissa would notice eventually, and when she did, her sense of control would be threatened. Watching her reaction was delicious. She frowned, a small crease forming between her brows. Her hands trembled just slightly as she adjusted another card. I bit back a satisfied smile. Perfect. Next, I targeted the bouquets. The florist had left a tray of arrangements near the prep room, and while no one was watching closely, I adjusted a few stems, altering their symmetry. To anyone else, it would have seemed trivial. But to Marissa, whose obsession with perfection knew no bounds, it was catastrophic. She inspected the arrangements herself, her fingers running along petals and ribbons. This isn't right, she muttered, tension rising in her voice. She tried to smooth the petals, but it wasn't enough. My subtle interference had disrupted the delicate harmony she craved. I moved like a ghost, careful to leave no trace. My aim wasn't to destroy, but to nudge, to create cracks that would spread. Small interruptions, tiny uncertainties. They were far more devastating than any overt attack. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the rehearsal itself. As the bridal party lined up, I observed every interaction, every gesture, every whispered conversation. Marissa's control was faltering. She snapped at bridesmaids over minor missteps, muttering instructions that contradicted previous directions. I noted everything meticulously. Each frustration, each flinch, each hurried movement would feed into the larger pattern of disruption. Ethan stayed close by, watching silently. I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew the stakes, and he trusted me completely. It wasn't just about Marissa's discomfort anymore. This was about setting the stage for the larger unraveling, the kind that would expose her to the family, to the guests, and most importantly, to herself. By mid-afternoon, the small ripples I had created began to intersect. Misplaced items, confused seating, frazzled assistants, all combined to create a subtle but undeniable tension. Marissa's radiant composure was cracking, and each micro-failure fed her anxiety. I lingered near the back of the room, quiet and unobtrusive, noting every twitch of her expression, every flicker of irritation, every slip of control. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I had envisioned. Later, during a brief break, I found myself alone with the catering staff. I made small suggestions, pointing out minor inconsistencies in the menu setup, asking questions about timing and delivery. To them, it was casual concern. To Marissa, it would later feel like incompetence, another invisible layer of tension building around her. It was almost artistic, the way chaos could be orchestrated with gentle nudges, subtle whispers, and unseen movements. The beauty lay in the precision, the fact that no one suspected me, and yet everything was bending toward my design. Ethan tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, she's getting really upset." I knelt down and whispered in his ear. "Good. That's how we know it's working. But stay calm, baby. Watch and learn. Mommy's in control." He nodded solemnly, eyes wide but understanding. He had witnessed enough over the past week to trust that I could manage this delicate balance. He was quiet, patient, a small witness to the unfolding plan. By the time the rehearsal ended, the cracks were visible even to outsiders. Marissa's smile was tight, her voice sharper, her hands restless. She thought she was still in control, but the undercurrent of disruption had already taken hold. I lingered in the shadows, letting the tension accumulate. Each whispered complaint, each small adjustment, each anxious gesture fed the fire I had been building for months. And I knew, tomorrow, the day of the wedding, these ripples would converge. Every small disruption would compound, creating a wave of chaos she could not escape. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, I returned home with Ethan, my mind racing ahead to the ceremony. Every minute was an opportunity. Every detail was a weapon. The map I had drawn in my journal, filled with observations and subtle manipulations, was now a living, breathing blueprint for the chaos to come. And I would follow it with the precision of a master. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and bright, a sky so blue it could have been painted by an artist's hand. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the storm about to erupt inside the church. Inside, every element, the flowers, the linens, the guests, was poised perfectly for disaster. Marissa floated through her morning routine, seemingly radiant, but the cracks had begun to show. Her veil didn't sit right. A bridesmaid's hair refused to cooperate. The seating chart revealed a subtle flaw. Nothing catastrophic, nothing obvious, but enough to make her doubt herself, to make her question her carefully crafted illusion. I watched from the sidelines, Ethan close by, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and satisfaction. This was the moment the subtle ripples I had orchestrated began to gather into a current of disruption. The first fracture came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A vendor, frazzled and exhausted, misread a timing note I had subtly suggested during the rehearsal. The result? The flower arrangements for the aisle were delivered a few minutes late. To anyone else, a minor inconvenience. To Marissa, it was an affront to the perfection she had demanded. She froze, hands gripping the edge of the table as she inspected the flowers. Where? Why? Her words trailed off, eyes darting between the florist and me. I remained calm, unobtrusive, but inside I smiled. Next came the seating. Guests arrived, shuffled by attendants. I watched carefully as the small errors I had introduced during the rehearsal began to show. Aunts and uncles ended up at the wrong tables. Friends swapped seats. Confusion, polite murmurs, and subtle annoyance rippled through the room. Marissa's hands clenched in frustration as she tried to correct each misplacement. Her composure faltered, her usual smile strained. I saw the first real signs of panic, just enough to make the carefully constructed facade crack. The small acts compounded quickly. A tray of appetizers was delivered slightly cold, timing misaligned with the caterer's schedule. The photographer, slightly off course due to my earlier adjustments, missed a few planned shots, forcing Marissa to redo poses she had thought perfect. Every minor disruption, invisible in isolation, combined into an unmistakable pattern of disorder. Marissa's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted around, scanning for errors, blaming anyone and everyone except herself. The room carried tension like a heavy fog, and I watched it settle over her like an invisible hand pressing down. I moved quietly, making tiny adjustments that would barely be noticed until later. A misplaced name card here, a slightly wrinkled napkin there. No one would suspect me, but the cumulative effect was undeniable. Every detail had been a small stone placed carefully in a line. Now, they formed a path that would collapse the perfect world Marissa had built. Ethan tugged gently at my sleeve. "Mom, she's so upset." "Yes, baby," I whispered. "And she's going to remember that feeling for a long time. Just stay calm and watch." He nodded solemnly, and I could see the mixture of fear and trust in his eyes. By mid-morning, whispers of frustration spread among the guests. Comments that seemed innocent. "Did you see where I'm supposed to sit?" Or, "The flowers aren't exactly like the pictures," began to circulate. Each one was a tiny pinprick to Marissa's armor. She tried to laugh it off, forcing her usual charm, but it was uneven, strained, and brittle. I could see the cracks forming in her posture, the tension in her jaw, the subtle tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the dress again and again. During a brief moment alone, I approached her quietly, offering a smile that was entirely neutral. "You're going to be amazing," I said softly. Her eyes flicked toward mine, sharp and searching. I hope so," she said, her voice tighter than intended. Inside, I felt a flicker of triumph. I didn't need to speak the truth aloud. It was already unfolding in the room around us. Every small act, every whisper of disorder, every missed beat of perfection had done its work. The final rehearsal for the ceremony itself brought the first visible signs of chaos. Bridesmaids tripped over dresses, adjusting hurriedly. Groomsmen misremembered their positions. The coordinator, frazzled by the minor changes I had introduced, stumbled over timing cues, adding another layer of tension. Marissa's face tightened. The serene bride-to-be she had always portrayed now a mask fraying at the edges. Every slight disruption, amplified by her obsession with control, became a glaring failure in her eyes. I watched from a corner, heart pounding with a mix of exhilaration and caution. Every step had to be calculated. I couldn't allow any suspicion to fall on me. The beauty of subtle sabotage was that it was invisible, yet utterly effective. Ethan stayed close, silent but understanding. A small anchor of trust. "Mom, it's working," he whispered. "Yes, baby," I said softly, stroking his hair. "But we stay careful. We're just getting started." By the time the rehearsal ended, the first fractures were undeniable. Guests whispered among themselves, the bridal party jittered, and Marissa's radiant composure had given way to tension, so palpable it could be cut with a knife. The foundation had been shaken. The storm had begun. And I knew, deep inside, that the real chaos, the one that would truly test her, was only a day away. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, But inside the church, a storm was brewing. Marissa moved through the suite like a tightly wound spring, her smile brittle, her eyes darting from detail to detail, searching for perfection and finding only imperfection. Ethan held my hand, quiet and watchful. I could feel his anxiety, but also a quiet trust that whatever happened, I would protect him. Today, that trust would be tested, not by me, but by the chaos I had meticulously orchestrated. The first visible consequences of my subtle sabotage began almost immediately. The florist arrived late, flustered, flowers slightly disarranged. Marissa's veil wouldn't sit correctly, slipping with the slightest movement. Bridesmaids whispered to one another, unsure of the timing and placement, their confusion spreading to the groomsmen. Every tiny misstep, every ripple I had introduced, was now multiplying exponentially. Marissa's hands trembled as she adjusted her gown again. It's not right, she muttered, voice sharp. Her usual aura of confidence had cracked, revealing raw tension underneath. I observed quietly, Ethan close by, my heart pounding with both anticipation and a trace of guilt. The guilt was fleeting. The fire of justice, long delayed, was too strong to be quenched. The seating arrangements began to unravel. Guests shuffled awkwardly, murmurs spreading like wildfire.